Hello, and welcome to the Michael Mamas Show. I'm your host, Michael Mamas, and we are coming to you from Mount Soma, home of the Sri Someshwara Temple in the mountains of western North Carolina. Today, it's an interesting topic, and even the way we came about it was kind of interesting, because as you know, we're working in the direction of completing the construction of the Enlightened City. And it's a question I get, multiple times every week. Guests come and they want to hear the story of Mount Soma. And so I talk about how in 1981, 82, I think it was 81, I was in the ashram and was talking to some guy, and he started talking about how the plans are there for enlightened cities. They're in the Shastras, in the Vedas. And the idea is one enlightened city is powerful enough to transform an entire continent. And when I heard that, I was like, let's build it, And it's just stuck with me all these years. And then in 94, when I first started the school, which evolved into Mount Soma, students from the very first class say I talked about it, and we have to build this enlightened city and all. And then in 2002, we bought this property, Mount Soma, and built the temple. And now that's just step one. And I've told the story about how incredible it was that I was asking pundits and Vedic architects, Tapatis, and it seemed like nobody knew anything about an enlightened city, and so I just proceeded with the little knowledge I had from that conversation in the ashram in the early 80s, and bought the property, proper elevation, proper weather, proper slope to the land, proper elevation, things like that. And one thing led to the next. I just kind of felt like we should have a Shiva Linga in the middle of the town. So I thought, well, we didn't have the money to do a temple. So I just thought, well, we can just get a little garage or something, little mobile building like they sell outside of Home Depot and Lowe's, and just stick a linga in it, something. And that just evolved, and we ended up building the Shiva temple. And we found the Stapati, the Vedic architect, was in South India, excellent credentials, and we hired him. And when he came to Mount Soma, the temple was well under construction at that time. Most of it we did, over the phone. But then I was talking about the enlightened city, and now here's the amazing thing. Unbelievable, really. He has in his possession the palm leaves, the cognitions of Mamuni Mayan, who was like the Vishwakarma's architect for the whole universe. Mamuni Mayan is like for the earth. And those cognitions explain in detail how to build the unified field generator, the core, the essence, and also the entire enlightened city, how to do it. Unbelievable. And so I asked him, is the Shiva temple okay where it is? And he said, perfect. So I'd rather be lucky than good, or, however you want to look at it. But at any rate, the point of this podcast is that you can feel the pulsation of time. And we all feel the pulsation of time. I mean, the sun rises and sets, on and on our whole lives. Sun rises, sunsets, sunrises, sunsets. And then there's the annual cycles, the 4 seasons, even the ticking of a watch, everything exists in cycles. And so it's all a function of time. Now, time, the God, the deity is Kala, and Kala is like a male aspect of Shiva. And so this is actually quite intriguing. I think that when the absolute emerges into relativity, the first deity, now what do we mean by that? Well, from the perspective of physics, you'd say the first impulse, the first manifestation, the first emergence from no thingness, the absolute, that which transcends things, transcends relativity. The first idea of thingness, if we can say it that way, is the deity Kala, is time. Time is absolutely foundational to the manifestation of existence, and time goes on eternally. I just find that beautiful. And even in this moment, from moment to moment, I'm looking at the camera there, it's stationary. There's no difference between now and now. But in fact, there is. Because I change, the molecular structure changed, things change, and it all goes according to time. And okay, you hear that, okay, well, yeah, okay, I get it. But when you live with these Vedic concepts for a while, when you live with them and start to feel them, there's not just a logical reasoning behind it, but you start to feel into time. Another word for Kala, for time, is transformation. Without time, there's no transformation. It's the essential nature of Kala, of time, is transformation. And so it's like when things are transformed, what happens? For one thing to be born, the prior moment, the prior thing has to cease to exist. So it's like a cycle of birth and death, death and birth, birth and death, birth and death, birth and death, moment to moment. Large cycles like the yugas, which are hundreds of thousands of years they can be, to instant to instant. But there's a pulse to it. There's a rhythm to it. The sun rises and sets. There's a rhythm. And you can feel into that rhythm. And as you live with the notion more, as you live with the concept more, as you rest with it more, you start to feel into that rhythm. You get a sense of the rhythm. You get a sense of the direction it's going. We all have that sense, with respect to what? The four seasons. It's intellectual, but there's also a feeling component to it. You can feel it. And so with respect to the major transition, now we're talking about this transition of a period of Sat Yuga, an age of enlightenment, a golden age. It's also beautiful, really. Emerging in this time period, transitioning from Kali Yuga to a brief period of Sat Yuga. Brief could even be 1,000 years. And there are things in the Vedic literature that are foretelling that. And keep in mind, there's the personified correlate, but there's also the physics of it. The personified correlate is, Lord Krishna told Mother Divine that at this time, 5,000 years ago, he told her that at this time, there's going to be a brief period of Sat Yuga in the midst of Kali Yuga. But the other component of that, the other aspect of that, is that it's a rhythm of physics that was known, seen, determined 5,000 years ago, and now it's happening. And then, interestingly enough, if you look at the world today, even the election, whoever wins, it's going to be a period of huge transition in one direction or another. We're in a period of major phase transition. And they talk about major periods of transition, how it can come about seamlessly, or it can be an Armageddon. And if you really take a step back and look at the world situation today, it's like, yeah, I can see it going either way, you know. I certainly believe it's going to be relatively seamless in contrast to an Armageddon or World War III, you know. But the thing is, if you get past your biases, your conditioning, if you just feel into it and look at it, it makes sense, you know. But now these transitions, see, when we get the idea that something is going to happen, or it's forecasted by Lord Krishna, for goodness sake, then we can say, okay, great, no, it's forecasted by Lord Krishna. We don't need to worry about it. We don't need to do anything. It's all going to happen. And that is actually not quite right. Because what is the nature of that transformation? Is it going to be an Armageddon, or is it going to be seamless, or is it going to be something in between? But it really feels like the world is crying out now. See, Kala is the male aspect. Kali, and we've all heard of Kali. Kali is the female aspect. And, you know, oftentimes when we look at Kali, we think of, you know, something terrible. Well, that's, you know, and horrible and destructive and blood everywhere and garland of skulls and all that. Well, if you're identified with what is in the moment and know that it's going to be destroyed, Shiva the destroyer, time, to bring forth the next thing, it can seem formidable. But the reality is that's Mother Divine. Kali is Mother Divine. She loves her children. She loves the earth. But we have to make the effort. See, God, somebody once said, well, if it's Lord Shiva's will, it will be no trouble, you know. And I said, yes, but Shiva works through people. And that's us. That's us. And we have the knowledge, we have the technology, we have the cognitions of Mamuni Mayan, how to build an enlightened city. So we got to do it. We got it. And it feels like the time is right. Things happen not in man's time, not in people's time, but in God's time, if we can put it that way. What do you mean by God's time? The sun rises and sets when it does. And that's all in God's time. It's nature. And now we're at that time of transition to bring about the golden age. But it's going to come about through us. And we're going to determine if it's an Armageddon or a seamless transition. And we have the technology to make it as seamless as possible. And I say it that way because, you know, if we did this 20 years ago, it would have been completely seamless. We wouldn't have noticed any big upheaval. But it wasn't time yet. It didn't even feel like it was time yet. We were working toward it, but it wasn't time yet. But now it feels the time is imminent if we can just act, if we can move forward. I was going to talk a little bit about the Hiranyagarbha. I've mentioned that before. Maybe we should do it another podcast because it gets to be too much, I think, for one podcast. But it was tied into my thoughts and my reflections over the past week, which is what these podcasts are always about, really. I remember once when I was with Marshy in Washington, D.C., we were there and there were another group somewhere else. And it was the middle of winter and it was a horrible blizzard and everybody wanted to come. But, you know, the planes weren't getting out. The runways were all icy. And I remember Marshy said something I thought was really good. You know, he said, hurry, but don't rush. It's simple, but really profound, you know. And that's what we have to do now. We have to hurry because we're not out of the woods. I mean, the nature of the transition is yet to be seen. We have to hurry, but we can't rush. We have to proceed methodically and carefully. And I'm feeling the support. I'm feeling different people stepping forward that want to make this happen. And I do believe we have the ability at this point to make it happen, which is incredible, really. This was just a dream at one time. But now I feel like we have the ability, if we put our minds to it, and we don't rush, but we hurry, we go for it, we can bring about the golden age. And with the existence, you see, of Mount Soma, of the enlightened city, the generator of that source of infinite harmony and coherence, it can be perpetuated. See, that will uphold it, it will maintain it right in the midst of Kali Yuga. Incredible. So that's where we are in time. And the opportunity is now. So we just have to make it happen. That's all I have, Scotty, unless you wanted to add something.
Well, one thing that just was coming to me is maybe you talk about free will versus predetermination a little bit, and how it feels like almost like we're watching these things happen, but
it's very germane, isn't it? It's very, very relevant to what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, it is predetermined that the sun will rise and the sun will set. Predetermined. You can look at it that way. It's an analogy. But nevertheless, sun rises, sun sets, sun rises, sun sets. But what's going to be the nature of what's happening on the earth as the sun rises and sets? What's going to be the nature of the transition from Sat Yuga to Kali Yuga? That's within the domain of free will. You see, it's not either or, but it's both. There is a predetermined aspect to life. It's the laws of karma, action, reaction, Newtonian physics. That's it. But then there's a Heisenberg uncertainty principle. There's a freedom, in other words, within that dynamic of predetermination. There's a free will component. And that's what we're working with now. We're working with that freedom where we can bring about that transition into the golden age without there being an Armageddon, and annihilation, an upheaval. And even if you watch the movies, you know, Hollywood keeps coming out with Armageddon scenarios and what do they call them, Scotty? You know, the movies about what happens after Armageddon and how horrible it is and all that. And then, of course, there's the melodramatic versions where some guy in a spaceship or something battles the bad guys and brings about the enlightened age. It's not going to be like that. You know, those are just Hollywood versions. But nevertheless, isn't it interesting? I've talked about before how science fiction is based upon an inner knowing, really, to some extent, an inner sensing. And by calling it fiction, the fiction writer frees up his doubts of his own intuition, if you will. And so that's where these ideas of, oh yeah, there's a golden age coming, you know. But it's real. So we have knowledge of two forms. We have knowledge that's just based on facts. Just look at the facts. Look at the world today. Look at the Vedic literature and what it tells us. It's all factual. But then you have knowledge with a capital K, which is our own intuitive felt sense, our own inner knowing, something that can be cultivated through meditation, through purification of our lives. And when those two things come together, that's called pure knowledge. That's real knowledge, you see. That's a good one, Scotty. It's a good point to bring that up. Okay, I think that's it. Thanks, Scotty, and thanks everybody for listening. And I look forward to seeing what we talk about next.